Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the classic Goosebumps TV show from the 90s that we all know and love. And it comes from season 3. It was an episode written by Ron Oliver and directed by Randy Bradshaw. And it is Bride of the Living Dummy. Now, this is the Night of the Living Dummy 2. I should put that in quotation marks because it's not advertised as 2. Original DVD release, but on the back it has Bride of the Living Dummy. And ignore this because this is a spoiler here. But Bride of the Living Dummies episode. Let me put this up front to you guys. When I was a kid, I had pretty much all the VHS tapes possible, minus Dummy 3 and Werewolf Skin. And I'll tell you this, Bride's VHS tape, the combo with An Old Story, I watched on repeat. It was one of my favorite episodes, one of my favorite things I could watch as a kid. My VHS player had this tape in it all the time. And it made me a massive fan of the Dummy episode, and when I started reading the books, it made me become a massive fan of Bride of the Living Dummy. And after watching this episode, I will be willing to admit that the episode made me a fan of the book when I was younger. Now, as an adult as well, I'm confident to say that I think for what this is, for this being a mostly in-name only episode to the book, if I'm being honest, there's really very few coincidental things that match up from the book. I still think this is a really great episode for what it was. It's not something I would totally give a glowing rating for, and you'll see that near the end. I do have some issues with it that kind of hold it back, but the rating I am going to give it is pretty fair, I would say, for what this is. And yeah, I still quite enjoy this episode and would recommend it to people if they maybe read the book but haven't watched the episode before. This is a fun little change up, or maybe somebody's looking to get into the TV show but doesn't know where to start. This might be a fun little episode for you to start with. Especially if you're trying to watch the Slappy episodes. This one is a good one to start off early with. This episode has a lot of charm to it. And I'll get into that near the end of the video. But off the bat, it gets a recommendation from me. Go watch this if you haven't seen it. But let's start off with the plot overview without giving too much away. So in the episode, it starts off with this man. He looks kind of disheveled. He's an older gentleman, and he goes by the name of Jimmy O. James. And he's wandering during a thunderstorm one night in this alley, and he stumbles across this chest with a dummy inside of it, and it turns out to be Slappy, the dummy that we all know from the TV show and the books. And Slappy is just laying in the trunk, and Jimmy pulls out Slappy and finds a card and reads the note on the card, which of course triggers the magic spell that brings Slappy to life. And Slappy scares Jimmy really bad and says, "Hey, if you want to make something out of yourself, you're gonna have to listen to what I say." And Jimmy looks shocked, but Slappy, maniacally laughs. And it's pretty much insinuated that Jimmy's going to be under Slappy's control. Well, when it cuts to the next scene, there's a time jump, and Jimmy O. James and Slappy are headlining this show at this local theater. And at the theater, Slappy and Jimmy are making some jokes. And we see out in the audience, we meet a group of three kids. Jillian, Harrison, and Katie. And Katie's brought her doll, Mary Ellen. Now, in this version of the story, compared to the book, Harrison was the friend of Jillian, but in the episode, I think Harrison's supposed to be the middle child and be the brother, and Katie, who had a twin sister from the book named Amanda, is now just the younger sister, Katie, and with no twin. But they're out in the stand, they're enjoying the show, and Slappy's making some jokes, and he looks over and stops joking with Jimmy, and he appears to be looking at Mary Ellen, and he looks mesmerized, like he's fallen in love or something. And Slappy snaps back into it and they finish the show up. And it comes to the point where when the show's wrapping up, the three kids head out and they're talking about, the show and how much fun they had and their plans, moving forward for the rest of the day. But Katie realizes that she left Mary Ellen in the stands, and Harrison makes a comment about that, and Jillian's like, well, somebody probably already took Mary Ellen. Maybe Jimmy O. James would have it because somebody might have brought Mary Ellen to him for some reason. So Jillian takes it upon herself to go try to track that down. And she ends up going backstage, wandering down this creepy hall, and she comes up to Jimmy's room and hears him talking to somebody, which sounds a lot like Slappy, and she accidentally barges in the room, and Jimmy's caught off guard and trying to divert the situation about what Jillian thought she heard, and Jimmy tells her that, Slappy's a special dummy that he's, made. He has like this function to him. He can make him talk, make him move on command. And Jillian's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And asked Jimmy about, if he's seen her sister's doll. And he's like, no, I haven't. I apologize. And Jillian's like, okay, well, thanks anyway. And she bids farewell. And we kind of see Jimmy looking over at Slappy, kind of upset. Well, Jillian makes it back with Harrison and Katie, and they regroup and they head home. Luckily, Katie found Mary Ellen. But when they get home, after the show, it's late at night, and it turns out a package was sent there the same day. And it was addressed to Jillian. And it was from Jimmy O. James, and they open up the package, and it's Slappy. And Jimmy O. James has now gifted Slappy to Jillian. And Jillian doesn't really want anything to do with him. And Katie is holding Mary Ellen, and she's really creepy about this. Is like, Mary Ellen doesn't want you to put Slappy downstairs. She wants Slappy to sleep upstairs. And we've already seen this kind of dynamic where her father has his workshop down in the basement. And Jillian wants nothing to do with Slappy. So she's like, I'm not listening to you or Mary Ellen, Katie. I'm putting Slappy down in the basement. So she puts Slappy down in the basement, and she goes to bed. Well, the next morning she wakes up, and since her and Katie share a room, Jillian starts screaming and notices that Slappy is on her dresser, and on the mirror of her dresser it says, I want my bride. And this scares the girls, and they start to wonder, what the case could be. Like, why is this a thing? Who did this? Who could have possibly done this? And Katie's like, well, I didn't do it. And Jillian's like, well, I didn't do it. And they try to tell their mom, and their mom's like, look, you guys need to settle this some way. Your father and I have something to do tonight. We don't need you to do it. But by the way, somebody stole my wedding ring, and I need you to help me find it. And the girls are like, well, we don't know what happened to it. And she's like, well, help me find it. We'll be back later. Just make sure you two, help me find it. And Jillian's like, all right, I've had enough of this. And decides to leave on her own, use her own allowance money, and take Slappy back to Jimmy O. James. And she leaves Katie home with Harrison, I guess, to watch TV and stuff, while she's going across town to give Slappy back. Well, when she gets back to the place where Jimmy does his shows, it looks deserted. So she goes exploring a little bit with Slappy in the trunk, and can't really seem to find Jimmy O. James. Well, she ends up, stumbling across like a graveyard of dummy parts, and Jimmy O. James happens to be there, and reveals to her that he doesn't want Slappy back, and essentially drops a bombshell to Jillian that Slappy's pure evil, and there's no way you can ever destroy Slappy. And Jillian's like, what do you mean? And grilling him about this, and Jimmy's like, look, he's tormented me. I can't deal with it anymore. You have to understand. And she's like, well, I'm leaving him with you again. And he's like begging her no. When she opens up the trunk, it turns out it's her dog. And her dog went missing the night before. The dog, I think, is named Petey, kind of like the lizard from the book, but in the episode's a dog. And I'm pretty sure it's the same dog from Welcome to Dead House's episode. Now thinking about it. But it looks like Slappy swapped out Petey into the case instead of him. So she freaks out and realizes the gravity of the situation and takes Petey over to a phone and calls home and tells Harrison and Katie that she's going to be home as soon as possible, but there's something wrong with Slappy and they need to, be safe while they're there. Well, Katie and Harrison take this instruction. Harrison then decides he doesn't feel good and goes up to the bathroom but gets locked in. And Katie starts to kind of freak out with Mary Ellen and tries to go up to her room, and she hears Slappy giggling. And Jillian comes home in the nick of time with the dog, and her and Katie have to go maneuver throughout the rest of the episode pretty much with Harrison sidelined locked in the bathroom. And Slappy is following him around, making some cackling noises, and throughout this, Katie is stressing to Jillian that we can't be doing this to Slappy. We can't harm him because Mary Ellen won't let her do it. And Jillian keeps trying to coach Katie to do things that Mary Ellen apparently doesn't want her to do. And they end up down in the basement where they've been trying to run from Slappy, or I guess find him. And there's a revelation, when they're trying to escape the basement window to get out of the house because they're locked in, that Mary Ellen is just getting in the way, so Jillian tries to discard her, and Mary Ellen comes to life and reveals this big old plan that, she will not let them leave because she's in love with Slappy, and Slappy comes through the basement window they try to escape from. And Slappy is like, yeah, I want my bride, and Mary Ellen walks over to him and says, yeah, Slappy, I'm ready to be your bride. But Slappy has some ulterior motives and doesn't want Mary Ellen. He wants one of the girls to be his bride. But it's not Jillian like the book. It's little Katie. Yeah. Kind of weird. Or very weird. But Jillian's like, Slappy, this is ridiculous. And, they're getting upset. And Slappy's like, look, I want you two to be my slaves. You're going to do whatever I say, and I'm going to get my bride. Well, Mary Ellen's upset that she's gotten offended by Slappy and decides to take some anger out on him. And, he accidentally activates a wood chipper, or not a wood chipper, but a circular saw that's down in the workshop. And they're wrestling on the stairs, and then they get knocked over, and they fall on the saw, and something happens to them. Let's just say that. Now, once that happens, the girls are, kind of relieved everything's over, and the parents come home, and they're talking with their parents about what happened down in the basement with Mary Ellen and Slappy, and they're like, it was an accident, but we're glad it's all over. And while they're talking, Jillian remembers something about Harrison, and Harrison's been locked in the bathroom this whole time. And the ending happens, and let's just say it's probably one of the most iconic endings in Goosebumps history. And that's essentially Bride of the Living Dummies episode. Off the bat, this episode, I think this was the only episode Ron Oliver outright wrote, besides supposedly Werewolf Skin, which was still credited to Dan Angel and Billy Brown for that episode for some reason. But Ron Oliver was able to take the Bride of the Living Dummy book. Mind you, when this episode was being filmed, the Bride of the Living Dummy book wasn't even released yet. They got, back in the day, they'd get scripts for new books way in advance, and they'd have to line up, creatively with R.L. Stine and his planning of the book most of the time. Which I think is kind of like a half-truth, because when I look at this, it makes me wonder if this was like an early draft of the actual book that we never got. But even if this was Ron Oliver's, just his own twist on the story, which, I'm kind of 50-50 on if Ron Oliver came up with this or this was more in tune with the original idea of Bride, this was really fun. this was a fun change up from the book. It makes it feel like an in-name only episode. The only thing that remains constant is Mary Ellen being a potential villain of the story. There's a particular scene with Slappy dealing with a dresser. And I guess one thing that's kind of constant is the show that the kids attend. Other than that, everything else is pretty different. And for how simple it is, it's like a 20 to 22 minute episode. It's almost perfect, but it has its flaws, right? But the positives are, Jillian has a great actress, Harrison has a great actor, Slappy, Cal Dodd did a great performance as Slappy. This might be my favorite Cal Dodd performance as Slappy, at least in his voice work. I think he finally perfected some of his quips. Slappy didn't have major moments like Dummy 3 here, but the performance looked really good. Mary Ellen looked creepy compared to the cover of the book. I mean, good God, Mary Ellen is creepy in this episode. The visual aspects to the dummies and the dolls look great. Even Mary Ellen's voice actor was great. They try to pack a lot of story into this, but comparatively to the other dummy episodes that came before it, this has a really good atmosphere to it. There's this weird tone to it as well. Jimmy O. James kind of steals the show in the first parts of the episode. He's just a really enigmatic character. He's very intriguing the way he's portrayed. The actor who played him did a phenomenal job. In a lot of ways, I think improved from the source material from the book, Jimmy O. James, that we got. And like I said, the ending to the episode is outright iconic. One of the best endings in Goosebumps history, in anything, any form of media of Goosebumps ever made. The ending to this episode is perfect. One of the best things to ever happen in this whole franchise, and I'll stand by that. A lot of highlight moments to it, but the negatives, keep sidelining them. The negatives to it, going back to the simplicity of it, I think the episode kind of falls back into the old Dummy 2 rigmarole. I think instead of taking some chances, kind of, like the book did, and that I'm saying that loosely, comparatively to the book, and I don't really like doing this, comparing the episodes to the book, I really don't, but it just feels a little basic. There's not a lot to it. And on paper, that shouldn't leave enough room to get wrong, but it doesn't really make it more exciting. It's more trying to build suspense on the characters and the whole Jimmy O. James stuff, trying to return Slappy to him. I think that was like the pinnacle point of the episode in terms of tension up until the very ending of it. And I think it's mostly due to the simplicity of it. It just goes back into the Dummy 2 rigmarole of things. It doesn't go over the top like Dummy 3, unless we're talking about with the motives of the Slappy himself, which, is another negative in its own right. But, yeah, it just feels kind of basic. And another issue, okay, we're going to go to Slappy, I guess. One of the issues I had from the book is that Slappy is just kind of icky. He's probably my least favorite Slappy ever. But here, for some reason, they thought that if Jillian wasn't enough motive for Slappy in the book, and if you know what I'm talking about, there's this whole innuendo with Slappy wanting to make Jillian his bride in the book. Well, in the episode, you want to make Katie, the younger sister, the bride. Why was that even changed to that? It's really bizarre. And that, like I said before, it makes me think back to, I'm pretty sure that this was based on the original concept of an older draft of Bride or something. Because why would you make that change? It's just so bizarre. And it makes the stuff come off icky-er. And it's more in your face. The simplicity and the ickier factor to it takes me out of it a little bit, if I'm being honest. It's just, I know I praised an old story, but I think there's more layers to that story compared to here. Here is just treated like shock value, and it's not good shock value. It's just touchy. It's a touchy thing, and it doesn't really land as well as an old story, because at least there's themes and deeper commentary to be taken from that story compared to here. No, doesn't work. And I guess my third negative would be, if I had any other thing to kind of critique about the episode, is that a lot of the times with these episodes, there's plot condensing, and when I think a lot of the issues from the episode, at least in terms of it being kind of basic, comes from plot condensing. And the inherent thing to take away from it is that, at least with the book, right, there's a lot of plot beats basing the book off of books 1 through 3 of the Night of the Living Dummy trilogy. But in the episode, instead of taking plot beats, the condensing really only showcases the home front aspect to the story, mostly. And in a lot of ways, it kind of makes it just a repeat of Dummy 2. Dummy 2 was a similar length episode, if not the same length, and it was mainly contained inside of this house. And compare it to the book, and like I said, I don't like doing this, but it just didn't really fit. And at least when we're talking with Jillian, right? Jillian, what made her interesting in the book doesn't really correlate to what makes her interesting in the episode. And at least in the episode, she has a great actress, but the condensing of her character, some things don't add up, right? And I don't know. It's just, it kind of, it's a weird thing, but trust me, if you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. It just feeds into the basicness of it. And I feel like it's a downgrade to the book in some areas. But overall, I'm willing to say that this is more entertaining than the book. And weirdly enough, the simplifying of the story makes it easier to digest, especially when we're talking about a 20 to 21 minute, 22 minute episode. And they try to jam-pack at least some things in there to make it entertaining. And I think it succeeds, and I think the performances really pull it out. I think the twist ending really sells me on this episode, more so without it. If it didn't have the iconic ending it does, this would be a really relative weaker one from the show. But there's some saving graces here that kind of propel it. Naturally, I would be gravitated to give something like this like a C tier, but that ending and some of these performances and some of the changes made to Jimmy O. James and stuff sold me on it, weirdly. Even though I think in some ways it's a downgrade from the book, in other ways it elevates the book. If you get what I'm saying? In the overall product, I'm willing to give this book at least a 4 out of 5. Where I settled with this, I decided to give it some credit here, and I gave this episode a 4 out of 5 stars. And it's a low B, it's a B minus of an episode, right on the cusp of a C plus, but I'm willing to give it that 4 pretty much because of the things that make it just pop. And trust me when I say this, there's some things in this episode that are truly iconic. Some of the best things in Goosebumps history. But that being said, though, it just kind of falls into its own vices, kind of different from the book, but also kind of similar, and kind of highlights some other smaller things and makes them more bigger negatives. It has less negatives across the board than the book, but the negatives it does have just impact it more. But overall, yeah, I really dig this episode, and I would recommend it. And yeah, that's my thoughts about Bride of the Living Dummies episode. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.